I was gonna say,
Okay, hold on. I'm sharing the screen again. What? Screen resume share. Okay, cool. There we go. Okay, you guys can see this?
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, cool. And it said it was recording, right?
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm about to start the timer.
Okay, cool.
Action.
Okay, so hi everyone. Good
Hi,
morning.
friends.
Hello.
How's
Hello,
it?
hello.
All right. So I shared my screen so you guys can all see the questions that we can like popcorn, discuss, whatever you want. I can go first. I am Latina. My mom is from Mexico, and in our culture, mental health and mental illness is not discussed, and if it is, it's kind of frowned upon. So the negative stigma. Luckily, my mom is very modern, so she's more like privy to all of this. But when I told my grandparents I was getting a degree in psychology, they did not understand. They just think that like if there's something wrong with your mental health, that you're just crazy. So that's kind of like the story that was told to me growing up.
I have a
Yeah,
super, oh, go ahead.
no, go for it, go for it.
I have a very similar experience from like half of my family. My dad's whole side of the family are Italian Catholics.
Mine too.
And yeah, they came to the US. I'm first born on both sides of my family in the US. My mom's whole side of the family is from like Scandinavia and moved to Canada, and so she's from Canada. And so her whole side of the family that's like Dutch and Swedish are very pro mental health, pro therapy, pro just very more progressive people. And my dad's side of the family is like the direct opposite. They're incredibly problematically conservative and like every meaning of the word, but specifically about mental health. They had the same reaction to me getting this career. They were like, that's not a good job. You should definitely pick something else.
That happened to me too. Like, why would like what are you gonna do with that? Like you should switch majors and like do business. I was like, what? No.
Same. Or they were like, you should be a psychiatrist or a real doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were
Really.
like, that's a fake degree or like a fake job. And I was like, thanks. So yeah.
Yeah, we have similar notions in our culture too. I'm Lebanese Armenian. And it's kind of like if you go to a therapist once, you're basically like you belong to the loonies. Like there's no
Yeah.
going back. Like, oh, this person went to a therapist 15 years ago once, and like that's it. That's that person's reputation. Um, so the messages around mental health aren't the healthiest. When we look at them as like sickos, and like talking isn't going to help. Like they don't think the whole therapy thing's the solution. Like why are we going to talk about it? Um, my mom's a lot more progressive about things for sure. So when my sister had some problems, she was very quick to sending her to therapy. But my dad was very hesitant on the whole thing. He's like, you just suck it up. He's like, I have the same thing, and I sucked it up. So that's kind of the messages we get. So very similar to your Destiny.
What are there for both of you guys who said you have family members who are like not interested in mental health and don't think that it's like valid? What are their views on like medication and that kind of thing, like psychiatric medication?
So like I said, my mom's more modern. My little brother is on the spectrum and he also has ADD like pretty severely. So he's on medication and she's very much all for it, like if it's gonna help.
Mhm.
But I think that even like my grandfather, like my mom's dad, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. Like the like saying, I don't know if anyone here like speaks Spanish, but the big saying is like no pasa nada. So like it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Like you don't need to do that. Like you shouldn't have to like be on medication. So I feel like now we've decided not to tell him anything or like my grandma because they just don't understand. So I would say that is the biggest thing.
Same. It's like my grandparents on my dad's side who are like, no meds. That's so bad for you. Like, why would you take that? You're gonna change your personality. And they like tried to get my brother off of all of his meds.
Mhm.
I'm full Mexican, and actually I grew up in Mexico. I came to United States, I don't know, like just like 7 years ago. So I experienced a lot of stigma regarding mental health. And I remember growing up seeing a lot of memes or hearing a lot of jokes about or devaluating the work of a therapist,
Mhm.
saying that therapists are therapists because they're gossip or because they're like to be noisy.
Yeah, chismosas.
Yes. And I also remember um relating the mental health with being crazy or being incompetent or being a turn too girly or
Mhm.
for weak individuals.
Yeah, weak for sure. I've heard that growing up too. Like, you must be weak if you have to like get help outside of the family, or if you can't like be strong for yourself. Because even I'm looking at the question like about the self-care, although my mom is more modern, like, and she understands, she still doesn't fully understand. And I feel like because she raised me to be such a like strong independent person, it's been hard for me to like do self-care for myself or like set boundaries because with my own like emotions and things like that, because or express them, because it's always like you don't show emotion, if you do you're weak, and you shouldn't, like, that just shouldn't be a thing. You should be stronger than that.
I have a different experience than all of you. Um, my mom is a therapist. My dad went to school for um human development and he was a social worker. My sister is a social worker for schools. She has her master's. So I have a very different experience. But I
I'm glad
will
that
say I'm the MFT. They're all social workers. So it's a little different. But they all have a very different like look at mental health. Like I think that they all respect mental health and how important it is. But I will say that my mom tried to talk both me and my sister out of working in mental health many times. And it's probably part of why it took me so long to finish school because I was told, like, I would be so good at this. This is something. And I really thought I was passionate. And then my mom was like, you're not going to make any money. It's not worth it. Like, it's sad work. Like, you're going to be depressed. You're going to be sad. And I was just like, ugh. And I was constantly told that. And then I was finally like, you know what? No, I still want to do it. Um, so even though they're like supportive of that, they weren't supportive of it as a necessarily as a career choice. Like even like when I got into this program, my mom's like, it's so much money to be a therapist. Like, do you really want to do that? And I was like, oh my God, yes, I do. So it was a lot of that, but they're supportive. And my mom does give me a lot of information anytime that I have like assignments, and my sister as well. Like I can bounce ideas off of them. Which is funny because my sister is 8 years younger than me and has her master's degree already. So and she's been a therapist for like a year now. So it's a little different. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because I have supportive family in the field of like if you have mental health, but going into mental health as a career, they're like, maybe not. Like maybe don't.
Mhm.
So it's just a little different.
Did
But
your mom offer like resources, or like, because I'm kind of looking at this second question, like, were
mhm.
you aware of like what was out there before like getting into this program?
I definitely had therapists. I
Yeah.
had a therapist for 10 years that I was really did really well with. I had another therapist that had me do EMDR work and it did not go well. Um, but I also was diagnosed with ADDID when I was young and it didn't and my mom was kind of like, eh, and we never really followed up on it, but it meant that like I struggled with school and I didn't graduate high school. I got a GED and then I took 13 years to get a bachelor's degree because I was in and out of school. I would fail classes consistently, or I wouldn't show up to classes, or whenever I lost interest in a class, or if I lost interest in like a subject, I had a really hard time. And my mom was just like, if it doesn't her thought process is if it's not hindering your regular functioning, it's not really a problem. And so because I was probably able to like go to work and I was able to hold jobs and I was able to do things, it didn't feel like it was hindering a functionality issue. But like if you think about it, like the fact that I had to get a GED because my schooling was so hard. But like when I took the GED in the state of Florida, if you pass with over a 95%, you get a high school diploma, and I passed with 98. So I did get a high school diploma from the state of,
Okay.
but it still feels weird when I'm like, no, I have a GED, because it's like I just had a really hard time with functionality, and I still do, but it's just different now as an adult where I can kind of push myself to do the resource work. And my sister always says like I should have had help for my depression and anxiety in high school, because there's a lot of resources for that for kids in high school now. And there were then too, but they were less prevalent. And I didn't have those offered to me in any
Yeah.
way, even
Same.
when things were really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, they told my mom in elementary school that I had ADD, and she was just like, okay, like, but when it came to my brother, which is also like a big thing, I think, in maybe Edna, you can understand this. Like, I feel like the boys in our culture sometimes get favored and looked after more than the girls. So when it came to me, it was like, okay, whatever, she has ADD. But when it came to my brother, it was like, let's do everything that we can to make sure that he like follows the right path. He had so many more resources than I did, and at least my mom was more open to them for him than she was for me. So I don't know if that speaks to our culture or that's just my family, but I have noticed that with other friends that are also from the same background have a similar experience when it comes to the boys versus them.
Do you feel like still
oh,
could do with birth? Oh, sorry, Alex.
oh
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask Destiny, do you feel like that also has to do with birth order though? Because you're the oldest.
Yes, and also when my mom had me, she was extremely young.
Right.
When me and my little brother are 15 years apart, me and my other little brother are 18 years apart. So they also like their dad is around. She's still married to them. My dad is suffers from mental illness. He lives in Spain and he's off the grid. So she didn't have the same support that she has now, like having a partner, and she's also wasn't financially stable when I was younger. So yeah, I think there's other factors other than the fact that like I'm a girl and
Yeah.
the
I was
boy.
just
But
wondering. Sorry.
she definitely babies them more than she ever babied me. Like it's kind of
Yeah.
wild.
I have a little brother too, and he's definitely babied significantly. But it's interesting because I have like the direct opposite experience with treatment, because up until I got diagnosed with ADD when I was in 5th grade, and I got put on Adderall when I was in 5th grade. And I took it, my mom made me take it every day until I turned 18. And I got off of it when I turned 8. I'm back on it now, but it took like 5 years because I was on like way too high dose. I was on like 50 milligrams every day from like age 8 to 18. And now I'm on like 10 as a 24-year-old. So that's like the discrepancy of the medication. But I was like very successful at school up until I got like the diagnosis, and school started getting a little bit harder. And so my mom like really wanted me to be academically successful like she was, because she's a teacher, and so she's very much like aware about all this kind of stuff. And I feel like it was also the time where ADHD was being diagnosed like up the wazoo for everyone my age, like early 2000s. And my brother got the same diagnosis and they never did anything about it, because he wasn't doing well in school before. And so I feel like they felt like it was, this sounds so horrible, but like it wasn't worth like trying to fix the problem in such an expensive way, because he was already not doing well in school and didn't really like school. And so I had like totally different rules than he did, and I had like different expectations.
Yeah, that's
And I went to therapy all the time.
yeah, I understand. Like I feel like it was the opposite. Like I wasn't doing good in school. My little brother is super successful in school, but because of, like being on the spectrum and all of this, and having ADD, he was still like doing really well. But I think because of that, they like were just like, oh, well, he's doing well, so let's make sure he continues to do well, especially because he got into a lot of trouble and they wanted to make sure that he could get away from the path that he was on. And I think like, oh, medication will help him, not continue to be involved in the things he was involved in, but it didn't help. So.
I feel like I talked to my therapist about this a lot also, like with girls versus boys with, I guess since they don't do ADD diagnosis anymore, it's a little bit different, but at the time it was so, I don't know about you guys, I think you both said you got ADD diagnosis, and my brother got ADHD diagnosis, because at the time like they were very different diagnosis. And I don't think that we actually have different issues. It was just I was so good at masking that like the concern was I was not running around because my mom told me to stop, not because I didn't want to. It was like I just wasn't allowed to.
Mhm.
I feel
I
like
don't know
that's
if you
also
guys,
part of it.
I don't know if you guys any like have like kids, but I have a daughter who when people are like, "Oh, I wish I had a girl. I have boys. Girls are so easy. They're so calm." And I was like, "I don't know whose girl
That's
you're
the thing.
talking about because it's not mine. My kid is like jumping off the walls 10 times a day. Like she falls, I think she fell 10 times yesterday between the time we picked her up and brought her home and by the time we went to bed. Like she'll flip off her bed and be like, "I'm okay." And she'll like jump up and she's like on her trampoline, she's doing flips. Like she's very hyperactive. And so when people are like, my boy is so hyperactive and like he does all these things and it's so normal, I'm like, well, is it not normal for girls? Because she's super hyper. Like she is like, she has low, I'm sure she has ADHD, but she's hyperactive all the time. She like moves around. She can't focus for long periods of time. She struggles with some executive functioning. Um, and she's only 3, so, like, it's not time to do, like, diagnoses yet because it's not really hindering anything yet, but eventually, like, if it continues, like, she doesn't sleep well unless she's, like, been run around a park for 4 hours, like, if she hasn't done laps, if she hasn't, like she's just hyperactive, and so the way that we treat girls and boys, like, boys probably the hyperactivity is less concerning to anybody, but when it's girls, they're like, "Oh my god, like, she's jumping off the walls, like, have you had her assessed?" And it's like, "Well, not yet, but we've thought about it because she can't go to a dance class and follow directions because she's too like I want to move and she wants to do spinning and she wants to do all these things and they're like girls follow directions. So it's very like the way that we look at and it's interesting because my mom, like I said, has worked in mental health and she's like, I wouldn't diagnose her with anything yet because she's so little. And I'm like, well, but when we take her to things, I have to think about am I looking at cultural conditioning of how we condition girls to behave with masking, or am I looking at a child who is actually struggling with a brain difference, like a neurodivergency, because she
And
is so
I was thinking too, like, or is she just also a young child who has energy, like a normal child?
totally
And are we just putting kids
3.
in? Because, like I said, my
Yeah,
mom's a kindergarten teacher, and she says all the time, like, are these kids actually ADHD or hyperactive, or is school just not set up to like accommodate 3 and 4 year olds? Like, they're not
Yeah.
supposed to be sitting for 6
Well, and
hours.
school is built off of our corrections and prison system. It's built to
Yeah.
be the same system. So it could be all of those things. And I work in an office for SLPs and stuff, and all of our kids have been diagnosed with autism. That's how they get to me. So when they come in, it's really interesting because we've seen doctors start giving out autism diagnoses in order for kids to get services. Um, and they are getting like ABA therapy, which is like really intense. And I don't know that I think 20 hours of an ABA therapist in your home is helpful. They get speech services and stuff, but you see a lot of kids and it's like, well, are they hyperactive or are we just expecting a lot out of a 4-year-old? Right?
Yeah.
It's hard.
I'm
Sorry, but
wondering,
I have
like,
to leave.
since you, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I have to leave in 2 minutes because I have to go to work.
Okay. Okay. Let's finish
Um,
up. Finish up.
Just because, yeah, I don't want to be like, hey, gotta go live. It's 2 minutes.
I feel like we've answered a lot of the questions
Yes,
also
we have.
without like directly addressing them also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should we kind of skip to the last one? Because that's like, I think the only one we
Yeah.
haven't answered.
Yeah.
Azad, you want to go first? Because I feel like you only got to talk once so far, and Edna can go after that because she also only got to talk like once.
yeah, for sure. How do you think that your own exposure to mental health stigma may influence you? So let's start. Seeing clients, what is your plan to prioritize self-care once you start seeing clients? So,
Or Edna, you want to go first?
if you have an answer, go for it.
The stigma that I was exposed regarding mental health um, made me give me the idea for years to not prioritize self-care. And into this day, I struggle to prioritize self-care. Destiny, you say something really important in lab last semester, and you say that we still learning, and it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay just to know do good our first dates, and that's stuck in my mind since that day. So I really appreciate you that, and I believe that just for my first clients, I want to have a better relationship with myself, with my thoughts, and being peace with just with myself. Because if I feel like I'm pressuring myself a lot, or if I'm having those negative thoughts, I can do good, and that's me all the time.
Yeah. I feel like because of the way that my mom, like I was saying earlier, she kind of raised me to be like very strong, very independent. It's been hard for me to prioritize self-care, but now that I'm kind of aware of that, I feel like I've made it a point in my personal life to prioritize self-care and balance. And I feel like I plan on continuing to do that with, well, once I'm like in a therapeutic setting with clients.
For me, it's funny because my issue was that I was my own enemy with that. Like my mom was very supportive in recognizing some of my deficiencies in education and how I'm struggling to be in class. And so I would definitely have been diagnosed with some sort of attention deficit disorder, but I was so stubborn and adamant that I'm okay. And I'm just like the other kids, mom. So don't put me in like no special classes. Don't put me in no assessments. Don't put me in like, I don't want that help. So like I cut that off and it's like, I can't even read one page out of a book because I'll read the same line like 5 times. And I'm like, okay, I can't do this. Like my brain won't let me go to that next line. So that's clearly a brain issue there, but I was just so stubborn that I wouldn't go for it. Um, so now that so that's my own little problem that I need to work through, especially with like starting to see clients. Uh, I need to break that pattern of stubbornness and actually prioritize my self-care. And so I'm gonna see a doctor these coming weeks because last semester was really difficult with the readings and stuff. I'm struggling really bad, or like even watching lectures and stuff. Like my mind is just all over the place. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna I owe this to myself, and part of owing it to myself is being disciplined to go to the doctor, but also own up to my situation. Like this is the help that I do need, and if I'm gonna be a good therapist and work with people, I need to be doing that, taking care of self as well. So I wish I listened to my mom, but I didn't. So that's why it's funny. I had that different issue. Like she was giving me the resources and I was fully rejecting them.
But don't
That's
be
so
so hard on
like,
yourself.
yeah, I was just gonna
Yeah.
say that that's like, I just loved everything you just said. And if I'm not sure if this like helps or makes you feel better, but I like was also given the resources. Well, I guess the resources were forced on me. And even though like at the time I was doing the same thing, like, please don't call me different. Please don't separate me from my friends. Like when you're that age and you get like any type of diagnosis, at least for me, it was like, oh my God, this is going to haunt me forever. I don't want to identify with this. Like I'm different. Something's wrong with me. And I hated therapy. I hated going. I hated like being on meds. And it took me like graduating high school and taking like a 3-year break from any type of mental health care to come back and appreciate it. So like, even if like you had accepted the resources, it still like might have been the same. So like, don't beat yourself up for those choices, because like the best you can do, you only can like, all we can do is our best, like with the resources and the tools that we have at our disposal. And I don't know, I just feel like it's really awesome that you're taking that step at your own time.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
it plays a big role. Like when you're younger, I feel like it's harder to like understand or conceptualize why you might need the help or the resources. And then once you get older, you're like, oh, okay, wait, like I want to do this for me because like that like frontal lobe kicks in and you're like, oh, this logically makes more sense. And it just didn't when you were a kid. That happened to me too. So I totally get it.
Yeah, there's like an ego and a pride involved. Like
Totally,
But
especially when you're a kid.
yeah. And even as
you
an
grow up
adult,
at the same rate as everyone else. Like I don't want to be less, but then all my grades are shot and like I'm not turning stuff in and they're like, you're not turning that assignment in? Why? I'm like, because I didn't want to. I don't want to do it.
yeah.
And I can imagine also like being a young, obviously like the pressures that are put on young women are very intense, but I also can imagine like being a young boy, like at least with watching how my brothers were, like they did not have the same emotional support and like understanding that I feel like I had and that my peers that were girls had. I feel like asking for help as a younger boy was really hard for my brothers, both of them, compared to how I felt asking for help.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Having little brothers, like now that I can see like just the way that they're treated, like I feel like it's harder for them, or like there's not as much grace given to boys as there is for girls, especially if they're like emotional. My little brother is like very emotional and sensitive, and I think it was kind of like, oh, like you shouldn't be that way because you're a boy.
Yeah,
So
suck it up and be a
suck it
man and
up.
deal with it.
Yeah, until like he had to do something very extreme for them to finally like wake up, which it shouldn't have to get that to that for you to like understand that boys are just as sensitive and need as much grace as like girls do.
Yeah.
Hazard, so there was way more stigma that there is now that when we were growing up. So that could also be
Yeah.
why you didn't want those resources to have.
Yeah, well, and also you probably see the benefit of the resources now as you're an adult, whereas like it's less embarrassing, right? Like it's like, oh, I'm an adult and I'm struggling with something, like I need to figure out how to fix that for myself. Whereas like when you're a kid, you're like, I don't want to argue with my parents. I don't want to tell them that something's wrong. I don't want to have that conversation. Like I know for me, like when my parents would be like, well, why aren't you doing your work? I'd be like, I don't want to. But really it was like because I have a really hard time sitting and reading for an hour, and I have a really hard time getting myself to just stay in one place. Like I can't do that. Like I don't want to. I want to do what I want to do. And that was really hard for me. So I can imagine that that would probably be really hard for you as well.
And also the like resources that are given, if you do accept them, are like more often than not incredibly strong medication, which as a kid it's like, you know,
Yeah.
changes
Okay.
your whole life.
Yeah, I have to go. Sorry, I have to go since it's
Oh,
my
you're good.
I have to like
Okay.
end the meeting.
This was great. This is a